look at my Wordle project here. I have a stopwatch. So let me try to solve this by my usual method. So let's say PARTY. The moment I guess this, you notice that the timer starts to move, and now it's counting how long I'm going to take to solve this problem. That's quite good start. I have three letters in the word, just that they're at the wrong position. So never mind. Let me try my next guess, which is music. As I see when I do this, well, in fact, I get my fourth letter as well. The last one, let's try HONED. So this is the standard set that I start with. All right, so I have an E as well. So basically, I have PTRUE. So okay, I think I know the word. That's going to be ERUPT, erupt. And the moment I do this, yes, indeed, the word is correct. I get a message saying you won, and here the time is stopped. So it has taken me 44 seconds to solve this problem from the time that I clicked the first guess. Yeah. Now, this is what we are going to build in this video. We are enhancing the Wordle project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. We have built a lot of enhancements already, and you might wonder, why is it that the timer we are building at the very end? In fact, the timer is something that we could have built even with the most basic game. But doing this is nice also because it tells us how frames are so useful. We will put a new frame to hold a timer and then a bunch of logic to make it work. So it's quite interesting. You can imagine that this has similarities with the birthday countdown project, because again we are dealing with time. There are some similar ideas that are going to happen here. So let me give you an overview of how we are going to do this, and then we'll do this in a step-by-step manner. Lots of work to get this done actually. So like I said, the first thing that we'll do is to create a frame and a label, which is going to hold our, let's say, timer widget, right? So let's do that right away. And then we will see how we can make the clock running freely, and then we'll add start, controls to say start, stop. So I get back to my project. Basically I'm going to first create a frame that goes and sits on top here, and everything else will basically move down. I'll adjust some of these spacing so that the frame can fit in quite nicely. So I come in here to my my, let's say, game. Remember, we have all these frames being created, so let me just create one more frame here. I call it, let's say, the timer frame. Timer, say, frame. And again, this has to be, so let me just copy these two over, and I will call it, let's say, timer frame. Now timer frame obviously has to go in a window. Go in the window. I use the border with, let's say, I just say, don't do any of this. This is fine. Now this timer frame, I want it to be right in the top row, right? So basically I'm just going to say, look, this row has to be 0. A column can be whatever, and in fact column span can be 2 as well. Let me not put any padding, and let me just do this. So basically I just want a frame right on top, but notice, since the timer frame has been put on top, every other frame must be moved down. So I'm going to make the KB frame as row number 3, because basically, remember, timer is 0, this whole game frame is timer. So game frame and letter frame are basically row number 2, sorry, row number 1. Hint and help is row number 2. KB frame hence becomes row number 3. So I just make this change. Remember my, the hint, and so not the label, but the frame itself, I'm going to have to make it to row number 2. And the letters and the game frame have to be row number 1, because the row number 0 has now been taken up by the timer frame. Again, power of frames, very flexible. I'm able to put it right up there. Now within this frame, within this timer frame, I'm just going to put a label which I can then use to basically update, so that it becomes like my running clock, right? So I just go and say, look, basically, so I just create a timer, let's say, label, and that is tk dot label. So let me just define it. Now this label must go inside the timer frame. The text for this, we'll start with, let's say, 00 and 00. So that's what we want to see. And the font, we can, well, let's say font is, again, this is all, how we want it to look, right? So let's just say, I say Times New Roman. and say of size 12. Now, when I'm doing this, I really don't have much on that timer frame. So I'm just going to say, well, timer label dot pack, uh, you know, um, onto the timer frame. Now, notice we have used grid for everything else. We are using pack here because again, this is inside frames, and this is one way we can use grid and pack together in a single window. Now, since I am doing, let's say all of this, I'm going to just, maybe kind of save some space here by, adding, let's say the hint frame, the help and hint frame, the HH frame, what I called. I'm going to say, remove the pad Y to, let's say 1, so that I hopefully will have some extra space available. Um, when I when I now run this, you notice I get a timer up here. Obviously, it's not running yet; it's just a label. Um, actually make this a little bit bigger as well so that we have sufficient room. So I'm just going to adjust the height a little bit here. Presently my window is, let's say, 400 times 500. So, you know, uh, let's make it, let's say, 550. Now you may just have to adjust it for your particular game, right? You notice now I have a lot of room here. So, everything is looking pretty good. Now let's, build the functionality to sort of make this, let's say, a free running clock. So that it's not linked with anything. The moment I start the GUI, let's say the clock runs and keeps running until I stop it. Now, let's just kind of think about how exactly that will happen. Like I said, this is quite similar to what we were doing in the birthday. Is that we have to use the time module. Now in the birthday counter, we use the date time because we are dealing also with the dates, but here time is just fine. We will use this thing called time.time. Now what this method does is that it gives me an increasing number as time counted from a well-defined point in the past. Now really it doesn't matter what this point is, but this point is like way behind in the past. So I'm saying that, look, when I create time.time, it's like saying this is the current time as a number which is coming measured from, let's say, the this time in the past, right? So basically we can mark the start time this way, and then we can keep computing the time elapsed, which is how much forward we have come from the start time. Every 1 second we keep updating the clock, kind of very similar to the idea in birthday countdown. And we'll see how we can use, so this should be can we should we'll use a function, a combination of functions and global variables to say a complete. Now, before moving forward, let's just understand this time.time function a little bit because that is kind of crucial to understanding how this whole thing is working. So I'm just going to get on my command line and say import time. Let's say I do t is time.time. Now, basically, if I look at t, that looks like a very large number because this is basically the time that's being counted from, in seconds from a certain fixed time. Right now, let's say I were to do this once again. If I look at t, you notice that it has kind of from, everything else remains the same. This 31 has become 42 because I have kind of come 11 seconds forward, right? Let's do this, let's say, once again. So if I were to look at time now, it has come another, let's say, 12 seconds forward. So basically using this time, even though it's coming from a fixed reference, we don't need to know the reference, what the reference is. By comparing the difference between these, let's say, instances of time, I can keep finding out what is the elapsed time that has happened, right? So I'm going to basically use this idea. In my, I'm going to import time over here in my project. So I just go and say import time because obviously I need this. And I'm going to create a function called start timer so that, the clock starts to move. Now this function is going to call one more function as we'll see later. But basically I get down to, let's say, my code here, wherever the functions get over, which is right here. So I'm just going to say, well, def say start the timer, right? So basically get the time started, right? So basically now, so now when this happens, well, I'm going to say, start time, say, I'm going to define a variable called start time, which is the present value of time. And we are going to, and I'm going to make this as a global because we'll need this in other functions as well. So I'll just go and say global start time because other functions will also need to use this. So basically what we have done with the start timer is that I've said that, okay, look, let me set the start timer, the start time. Let me kind of peg that to a particular value. And thereafter, I call this function called update timer. Now this function is actually quite interesting. So I just go and say update, say update timer, because remember the timer right now we're just building a free running clock. The timer must keep updating itself every 1 second. Now again, this is quite interesting. Now let's look at how we can write this update timer function. This is somewhat interesting as well. So I'm just going to say, well, update timer, let's say update timer. And the way I'm going to do this is, well, basically I'm going to use the start time. So global, let's say start time, um, so start time has been basically done once. I'm going to find out the elapsed time by saying, okay, look, elapsed time is, the difference between, let's say in integers. So I just want the seconds portion of it because this is in seconds. The difference between the present time minus the start time. Remember, start time has come from the time we started the clock. Now I'm going basically, let's say, whatever the present time is, like we just saw here, and I'm comparing that with the start time. This is kind of exactly same as what we were doing in the birthday countdown, except that we are comparing with the current time and dates were also involved. So here we are looking only at time, and having done this, I must basically convert this elapsed time into, let's say, minutes and seconds, assuming that we don't need beyond that because nobody will pay this for hours anyway. Minutes and say seconds is, well, div mod, int, let's say, so it's already int actually, so I can just do elapsed time and 60. So that will give me the minutes in seconds, in let's say, basically, as a quotient and the remainder. Now, having done this, I already have a timer label. All I need to do is to update its text to, let's say 00.01, 00.02, and so on. So basically, every second that must happen. But I'm going to use something special. I'm going to do this thing called f string for doing this, and we'll see why we are doing this, right? Because it's actually very interesting here, right? So I'm going to say minutes, let's say 02, and say colon seconds 02. Now notice minutes and seconds are variables. What I'm trying to do here is that I am going to say that, look, please print this in two decimal places. So let's understand this here. So let's say I have a variable a, which is, so let's say I have a is equal to 2. Notice when I do print of a, or anything like that, it tells me 2. But when I do the same thing with a f string, right? So it's kind of like saying that, look, format this with two decimal places, with sort of two digits, right? So basically it prints it as 02. Now if I were to do this as 05, it prints it as 00002. So very powerful because it's formatting this. Now why am I doing this? Because remember, my label is 00:00. So I want first two digits to be minutes, the next two digits to be seconds. Now this will update my timer label, but remember, this update must keep happening every 1 second. So the way we do that is almost exactly same as what we have done for the animation in Turtle. I'm going to say window dot after 1000, and basically update timer once again. So it's like saying that, look, wait for 1000 millisecond, which is 1 second, and at that point go and call this function once again. Start time has been defined just once in the beginning. Go and find the elapsed time. Remember, time.time is moved, and hence you will see that timer is moving every second. Now, having defined these functions, I will just trigger the start timer once, and I'll do it once, at the basically wherever I have created these timer labels, all of that is done. Then I just go and call, let's say, once this start timer. Now, basically the idea is that once this starts, then remember it initializes the start time, and thereafter it uses the update method, which then keeps calling itself every second, so the clock should keep running. Notice when I run this, project now, the clock is running by itself, right? Now, this is creating my free running clock. Obviously, it'll keep running until the time I close it. Or, let's say if it goes beyond 1 hour, then obviously this is not correct. But, expected that we will not go beyond 1 hour, right? Notice every 1 second, this is updating. But now comes the question that, look, we need to control this clock. We need to start this not as a free running clock, but in fact, we want to start this once the, let's say this guess button is clicked. But then we must also be aware of the fact that the clock is running or not running, because I'm going to click the guess button again and again. First time round, it must go and start the, let's say the clock. Otherwise, it should not. So what I will do is that I will define a bunch of other variables. Let me just let it run. I'm going to just say, look, I'm going to start this timer provided the timer is not always or not already running, right? So if the timer is already running, then I let it be. But if it's not running, then I will go and, let's say, let's say start the timer, right? So I just create a bunch of variables, let's say. So I just call it, let's say, start time. We already had it. I'm going to create a variable called, let's say, timer running. Now, in the beginning, I'm going to set this to a false, right? So because, I don't want to start the timer right away. What I will do is that I'll just set this variable, let's say timer running is equal to false. So, this is the case in the beginning, but remember, this is a global. I will ask myself that, look, if this timer is not running, then let me start the timer. Let me notice let's say the start time, right? So I just go and put here, if let's say not say timer, running, well, in that case, please start the time, update the timer as well, and make sure that the timer running then becomes, let's say, true. So now, having done this, I can now get to my get word function. And once again, remember, if the timer is not running, then I can make it run, right? So if I just go and click on this, I just go and say, look, if not timer, let's say, running, well, in that case, time. Start the timer, actually, right? So this is interesting because the moment I click this first time, remember, timer is not running, that will go and kickstart my clock. Notice now when I start my game, the timer doesn't immediately start. The moment, however, if I click guess, even though there's nothing here, my timer starts to run, right? Now, obviously, I can, guess some words. So music, let's say, if I click guess music, I click guess. Notice nothing happens to the timer. The timer keeps running. If I had not put that condition, the timer would have gotten reset to the present time. So start time has been pegged once, and that is what is going on. Now, what we need additional to this is basically a mechanism to stop the timer. So I can create a new function. I just go and say, well, def, let's say, stop timer. Now, all I am going to do here is to say that, look, I'll set the timer running to, let's say, false. Now, why would this work? Because in my update timer function, I will just say that, look, I'm going to use this global variable timer running. Of course, in my stop timer also, I must define this as, let's say, global, let's say, global, say, timer running. And timer running. And basically, in the update timer, I will do the updating of time only when the timer is running. So I just go and say, if say timer running, then do all this, and otherwise don't bother, right? So basically, when I, let's say, stop the stopwatch, stop the timer, then the this global variable becomes false and my updation stops. The clock just. So the question is, where do I stop this timer? Well, there are really two scenarios. I will stop the timer, you know, um, either I guess it correctly, which means I win. So I just go and say, well, let me stop timer here. Okay, so stop the timer. And, on the other hand, if I lose, also I will stop the timer. So basically, tell me how long I played this game, and the timer would stop. Basically those the label would completely freeze, right? So let's see this in action. When I run this now, notice this is paused here. Let's say I try my usual suspects, PAR, say TY. I click guess, the timer starts to move. Now I'm in some kind of a rush to say solve this. Let's say I try music, say music, music. uh, Timer continues to run because again the timer was already running. Music, let's try hone. My, so I know A and R and C are there, HONED. Well, unfortunately none of those was there, so okay, let's take some help, remove some of those letters. Okay, so I have, okay, so I have a B in there. Okay, could it be grace? Okay, let's just try grace. All right, GRACE. I know E is not there, so it can't be, but still, okay, nice. So it does tell me there are three of these letters. Okay, so there's probably brack. There's nothing called brack. Okay, maybe I can take a hint. Oh, all right. So there's a repeated C. All right, so I know the answer. It's CRACK. And when I do this, I'm winning the game. You notice the timer stops, right? And basically told me, look, I played this for 1 minute and 8 seconds. Now let's just also try this for a losing cause. So let's say I just say, well, I'll be quite naive in my guessing here. If I keep guessing, let's say music, notice I click this, the game starts. Let's say I keep doing the same thing again and again. Obviously, I'm bound to lose in this situation. Let's say I say music. I keep guessing this. Let me just put this here, say music, so I can do it faster. Say again music, say music. I'm just deliberately trying to lose to see if my timer stops or not, right? In fact, it tells me you lost and you notice the timer has stopped. Exactly what we had thought. Now, obviously, this adds a pretty interesting new dimension to the whole project. Clearly, we have come a long, long way from the time we started from the basic class project to what we have now. A bunch of new features have been built in. And that's the beauty of this, that you can keep building this. There are new ideas all the time. And you can keep making the game better. I hope you found this interesting. Now, this way of learning is clearly very powerful in my Now, this way of learning is clearly very, very powerful because we're building an activity, we are thinking about it, we are enhancing it. Now, this way of learning is clearly very, very powerful because we are building an activity, we are thinking of how we can enhance it and then implementing those enhancements. So that structures our thinking in a very nice way and keeps the whole journey very, very interesting. So look at our website, www.ybyte.in, because that is how we learn Python programming through such fun activities. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.